these sectors and experimenting, trying, failing quickly, no problem. But I think it will set in a new mindset and culture of innovation and investing in technology.
Let me just get Jayant in for one more take on that. Jayant, you've also been talking about that 1 lakh crore rupee. Okay, I'm just going to come back to him in a couple of minutes and get his reaction on that. Moving on then to manufacturing, because as you rightly said, what India does in some of these areas, electronics, mobile phones, obviously there's been some chatter around that, but specifically the auto sectors where we've really tested it. There has been some experience. Some companies have come, Japanese companies, Korean companies, Volvo's out here. How has that experience been? Anything that you would have been looking for in the interim budget? Perhaps not. But some policy announcements or just continued directional announcements on what you think need to be done?
I think
if India has to become an automotive manufacturing center for the world.
So I think a few things have happened, even though it was an interim budget. I think the direction was very, very clear. She is investing a lot in infrastructure development, which is very important for the automotive or the connectivity sector. So which means that another 10-11% going more into capex at about 11 lakh crore. I think it's a very, very handsome and good budget. So I think that will help a lot. Then, of course, there are offline, the government has started something called hydrogen mission, where there is an ambition to become the largest manufacturer of hydrogen in the world. And this new energy transition which is going to happen, it's not going to be all electric, by the way. So electric is going to be a very major part, but there are going to be alternate non-fossil fuels like hydrogen fuel cells and hydrogen as a fuel. So I think a huge amount of attention is being developed, being given there as well, which we've not talked in the budget today. Obviously, it was an interim budget. So to my mind, directionally, we are on the right track.
But could India become the leader? Obviously, one of the logic of everything that you're hearing from the government is that India should be one of the leaders in this technology.
Absolutely.
Now, when it comes to, again, staying with automotive for a little bit, if you look at what is coming, electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel, how will all of this actually translate? Because the era of fossil fuels is going. There is, at least in the rest of the world, a perception that China is taking the edge, right? With whether it's BYD in electric vehicles or CATL making batteries. China is really the big, strong player. What does India need to do to say, no, hang on, it's not just China, we are there as well?
I think a lot of component manufacturing has to come into India. Unfortunately, we have been not doing very, very well. We have not been focused at component manufacturing. And I think the new policies which the government has brought for Make in India, I think that's really putting a pressure on that. So whether it is battery cell manufacturing or if it is hydrogen and a lot of chips manufacturing, because automotive sectors, 50% of a car or a truck today is ECUs, electronic control units. So a lot of chip manufacturing is coming into India. So I think which is also very good. So I think these are the real sector within the subsectors within automotive industry. We need to focus there and not simply be the assembly shop of the world. So I think that is the shift which I see in the last 10 years, that from just assembling vehicles in India to actually manufacturing at component level. That's the shift what we see, and I think this budget is going to, the coming budget in July, I'm sure is going to push further a few notches on that.
There's been a lot of talk about how do you incentivize the states to do a lot more. And you're, of course, the head of CIA for the entire southern region, so important to ask you that question. There's this perception that whether it comes to the tech industry, Bangalore, Hyderabad, manufacturing, states like Tamil Nadu, a lot of that activity is taking place in the south. What are the southern states doing that are different and perhaps lessons that the rest of the country can take?
Yeah, I think one of it is that the southern states have had a head start over the rest of the country over a period of time. And I think, for instance, places like Bangalore, Chennai have become centers of excellence when it comes to automotive. In addition to Pune, Chennai today is a very, very big center of excellence when it comes to manufacturing. So I think there has been I would say the skill levels have been pretty high in these states. Second, the support from the government and ease of doing business has also been on a very good note. So I think these are some of the factors which have actually given that advantage to southern states. And then, of course, today every state is bringing in a EV or a non-fossil fuel policy. So I think that's of course now a common factor today. I would say, in addition to the central government subsidies like PLI and others, the state governments are also offering support, whether it is for setting up a facility, whether it is for giving you support for the initial few years, subsidy on capital expenditure. So I think this is something which is happening in the right way. But Vikram, just to say, but this doesn't mean that we are all done and dusted. There is a long way to go. Our MSMEs need a lot of support, and that will continue. That's not a thing yet ticked off completely. Then they need support with Industry 4.0 happening, connected solutions coming in. So we will have to really take them so that they can actually be part of the global value chain, which you have been talking about very correctly. So I think that is the journey while we may have some very good anchor companies like a Volvo, Toyota or someone, but I think end of the day, you also need the complete value chain within India to develop, which is something which we need to work on.
So one last question. When you look at big companies, international companies saying, let us now, we want this one, China plus one, let's bet on India. Let's not bet on Vietnam, let's not bet somewhere else, let's bet on India. Big market, growing, everything else. What are some of the factors that are kept in mind? Like if you had to convince people back at headquarters or some of your colleagues had to do it, no, come make a bigger bet in India. Somebody had to tell Elon Musk, come here. What is it that they say? What are the good points, bad points? Because the bad points obviously is what needs fixing.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think there is a huge confidence in the India story. Today, Vikram, when you go out, you don't have to sell the India story. The India story is now well established. People know that we have the capability, we have the talent. I mean, initially people came in here for lower cost, but today people are coming in because of talent. You will be surprised to know that the largest number of capability or global technology centers of Fortune 5 companies in the world are in India. So we have the right talent. So that's another very good thing. Third, we speak English. That's a great advantage. And if you compare with the rest of the world, our democracy seems quite stable and working. So that's another one. So they trust the Indian infrastructure increasingly, and I think trust is the biggest factor, which to my mind is bringing them here. But yes, they know that we have some challenges. We have some challenges of the judicial system taking its time. But that good news is that we have a...
Everyone keeps saying that. That's the one item on the pending agenda.
Yeah.
You can't have cases that go on for 10 years, 20 years, 25 years. That's the one possible big thing that is holding back.
That's one challenge. Even though everybody believes that we ultimately get justice. I mean, the judicial system is there, but I think it is too delayed. And that can, in today's day and age, that may be too late. So we need to fix that part first. But otherwise, we have a very strong story as far as our people, our capabilities, our competencies, and trust is concerned. So I think that's what is bringing more and more investments in India.
All right, Mr. Bari, thank you so much for joining us. Very clear perspective of all the strengths are, and yes, the unfinished agenda that needs to be fixed. Dr. Singh, I just wanted to get you in on that. You heard that listing of what the good parts and the good things about India is. Unfinished agenda is something which we're keeping on looking forward to in the roadmap. What he was just saying, one of the things that people in the rest of the world worry about, long cases which go on forever, judicial delays, would that be one of the major areas that you think needs to be fixed now in the next 5 years?
Sorry, Vikram, can you just repeat the last sentence?
Yeah, asking that as we were just hearing from Mr. Bali, there's so many things that India has going for it, so many things that foreign investors look to and get encouraged by. Perhaps the one area where they would still be somewhat concerned, which we should try and fix, are things like too long a process in going for arbitration or cases going on for years, if not decades, getting that sort of a thing fixed, policy flip-flops. That's one of the areas that still needs to be fixed in the next 5 years or 10 years.
Yeah, I think everything is good because the Western world really sees India not only as a big customer base but also as an investment base. So in that sense, it's been good. But India definitely needs both administrative and judicial reforms. The cost of doing business is still very high. The ease of doing business, in spite of several positives, is still something that we really need to work on. So these are some of the things that the finance minister needs to focus on. Administrative reforms is something that is immediately needed, because the Indian government and the Indian people should not think that we are the only people in the world who can draw investment, because there are others who are competing with us. There are smaller companies, there are smaller countries which seem to be doing better than us in attracting investment. So we've done well, but India needs a pat on the back, but still not done. There's still a few things that needs to be taken care of.
All right, Eddie, as we're looking at the fine print in everything that we are seeing right now, the fact that there are no changes in terms of taxation, that is something pretty much to be expected. But did you hear an indication, at least from Nirmala Sitharaman, that one of the basic principles of taxation is something that she believes in, and therefore, in case this government comes back, which of course we'll know in a couple of months, should be the principle, which is the Laffer curve, which is low and moderate taxation, ease of paying your taxes. So compliance, the fact that it's faceless, the fact that people are just being able to, you get those pre-filled forms, that seems to be something that now the government seems to be believing is very much the right direction to go. You trust in people, you allow them to pay their taxes, and you do it in a very simple manner. Your tax buoyancy will take care of a lot of the expenses that you need.
Yeah, I think over the last 5 years, I think the number of people who are filing tax is going up. But India needs to, we need to do more. Even today, close to about 20% of the people, rich farmers, who are still not paying taxes. I think it's a difficult bullet to bite, but I think it needs to be done, because we can't have a society where the rich farmers just get away by not paying anything, whereas the middle class, the salaried class have absolutely no leeway to either save taxes or so they rue the fact that they are really left out. So India needs to work, it needs to expand the tax base, and I think India has now the technology and the means to really identify those people who are not paying taxes, even if they are in the farm sector. That needs to be done. I mean, people talk about that why should farmers pay taxes, but they're close to about, our estimate and our research says that close to about 20% of farmers can pay tax, and they should pay tax. So that's one. Yes, you're absolutely right that the trust factor has really gone up. People are paying taxes, people are compliant. Having said that, I think we need to really bite that bullet, because...
All right, Dr. Singh, I'm just going to pause you. All right, Dr. Singh, I'm just going to pause you there for a minute and come back to you in a couple of minutes, because we do have Vinayak Chatterjee now joining us, the InfraVision Foundation founder and managing trustee of that. Somebody who's been leading the charge on infrastructure for a fairly long period of time. Vinayak, I think the first time I did a budget special with you would have been, what, about 20, 30 years ago maybe. And I remember you from that time have been saying, infrastructure, we need to build infrastructure. If only we would build infrastructure, the Indian economy would go to places. I'm sure you remember some of those sessions 25 years ago.
Of course I do. 30 years ago, we were both younger then.
Did you ever think a day would be coming where you would be having 11 lakh crore rupees being allocated for infrastructure spending in a single year? I'm not surprised you're smiling. You're smiling, and I'm not surprised you're smiling.
I am smiling, but I am not totally delighted, for the simple reason that you can see that the government strategy, economic strategy, has been articulated, that it was pushing GDP by infrastructure-led investment. That was the prime driver of India's economy, with major multiple effects. And in the last 2 years, if you remember, on your channel also, we discussed that year before last, the increase in allocation was 30%. It went up from 5 lakh crores to 7.5 lakh crores. And last year, it increased by 35% from 7.5 lakh crores to 10 lakh crores. So if you're talking about a continuing momentum, then the momentum is 30%. So I would have expected that a 10 lakh crore allocation last year would, as per the same inertia or momentum, moved up to 13 lakh crore allocation this time, whereas we've got only 11.1. So I console myself by saying that this is just an interim budget. And if the government is going to carry on following its policy of public expenditure, infrastructure investment-led growth to boost GDP, then when the final budget is written in June or July, we are going to get back to 30%. So let me stop here.
All right. All right, Vinayak, just hold that thought. I'm going to come back to you in a couple of minutes because we do have the man himself, Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General of CII, the person who knows exactly what's happening with all economic policies, economic reforms, drafting the budget speeches. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit now, CB. But what is your sense of it? Well, that's certainly the shortest speech we've heard in a long, long time. Interim budget. What did you make of it?
So I thought it was very prudent, number one, I must say that. And secondly, it was a budget, if I may say, I was extremely fascinated that we kept on the path of fiscal prudence, and that was very, very critical for us to see that at this point in time. And second, the quality of expenditure, say for instance, when we look at a higher capex, we see a lot being done on social side of it. It's just not the physical infrastructure, but the social infrastructure focus. So besides the deficit, the way it has been handled. The third point, and I'll end because Mr. Singh is here. The third point that I'd like to really focus on in terms of prudence was, if you really look at the way borrowing has been handled, which leads to, I would believe, both nominal and real interest rates getting moderated, which in reality affects all people, even the common man.
Right. Well, as you said, Mr. N.K. Singh is with us as well. Such a pleasure, sir, to have you with us. Today is the day, as we've been discussing, to take stock of the last 10 years and perhaps set a roadmap for the next 5 or the next 10. How did you see the report card that she, in a sense, did present today? It was also there in the review. How do you see the report card of the last 5-10 years? And more importantly, what is the unfinished business that we need to do to keep growing at 7%, 8%, 9% and becoming a developed country? What's the unfinished agenda?
Well, I think that's a very credible report card. It's credible because it's based on performance. It's credible because if next year's 7% growth rate is more likely than not, this would be the 4th year in succession where India would have grown in real terms of 7% or so, which would be a record in itself. So it's a credible story of growth. It's a credible story of macroeconomic stability in terms of keeping fiscal deficits and debt numbers in place. It's a credible story on changing the quality of expenditure into moving more and more into capital creating expenditure, doing away with the deficiencies of infrastructure, cost and efficient economy as such. And therefore, the question of what is the unfinished story is a difficult question. I would say 2 important things. One is an aspect beyond us, which is exogenous circumstances. Exogenous circumstances we cannot manage, but we can always plan for keeping some room and cushion that in case those exogenous circumstances come, there is space to be able to respond. Second, I think there are a number of reforms on the factors of production. States need to be incentivized on the unfinished agenda, on land and labor, on which a lot depends on the kind of action that they have to initiate. So continue this momentum, continue this growth story, and I think that the confidence which this government has demonstrated in terms of shying away from what could be viewed as immediate populist gains into adhering to the path of what would give investors, rating agencies, the story of India's high growth. This is India's time, and this budget consolidates confidence and trust, which now seems to be embedded.
I'm just going to take that unfinished agenda item. Let's face it, all of us tend to be greedy. When you have a good run and you're going at 7%, you say, why can't we grow at 9% and what needs to be fixed? Mr. N.K. Singh referred to two things. Fixing the factors of production, which are still, there are a lot of supply side reform has taken place, but land and labor, maybe something more needs to be done. And just before you came, one of my favorite subjects was being discussed, which was pendency, judicial pendency, delays, arbitration. How do you get that part of it, contract resolution, laws? How do you get that moving in a more efficient manner? Would you agree with that, those items, or would you add something else of your own?
No, I'll agree with you, of course, and I think, but I would only like to add that when you really look at areas of like decriminalization, the amount of work which has been done, and Vikram, you've been a part of it, a lot has been moved on as far as decrim, especially the way things have moved. I think that's a huge amount of work done. Yes, much more can be done. And I would really move on to the state level. A lot of reforms would need to be done at the state levels because investment at the end of the day is taking place there. So even from the industry perspective, I would look at a lot to be done there. And I think that follow-up is important. The second is when you talk about, you just mentioned about two areas, land. Now, much of that, there is a lot to do again with the states. And the fiscal prudence of the states are now going to be, again, a very, very important area. Because we see focus today being given in the interim budget on rural India, a lot on the agri sector. These are also, there's a lot of state subjects in all of this. So I think besides the fiscal prudence of the states, reforms by the states on some of these areas are going to be critical areas to work on.
There seems to be a movement towards using incentives to get the states to carry out the reforms. It was there in labor, it's there in other things. You, of course, have been driving a lot of that at the Finance Commission. How do you make sure that all states are aligned and take the right steps? Is it partly about setting up a competition between them? Is it the use of direct incentives, as might be happening in tourism right now with the announcements we heard today?
Well, I think that, we need to take some comfort that a lot of it is working, because if you look at the report card, in the 1 lakh plus crore which was given for capital expenditure, the utilization has been over 90% by the states, which is a very, very favorable story. Second, I think that there is a great nudge, if you see, Vikram, in the announcements which were made today, or the issues which came up, was this rooftop solar as an important ingredient. Now that is, apart from the immediate environmental impact of what solar rooftops might do, has another deep embedded reform story. Namely, that one of the most laggard aspects of our reforms has been the reforms of the power distribution companies by the states. And if this rooftop story is going to give them inherent competition, they've been nudged into reforming the long needed reforms of the power distribution companies, which is a very important. So that's a classic example of doing it by way of incentives, both direct and indirect, to bring about. And I think that if they extend it in terms of really, now take for instance tourism, it's a comparative kind of a thing. One of the story which was there was on creating of new cities by way of the grants which were given by the earlier Finance Commission to be done. So it's a combination of incentives, nudging them, because the states are now willing to take on the challenge. Look at their performance on the state GST. They are a major beneficiary of the improved tax buoyancy and tax reforms. And the tax figures this year close to 18%.
Yeah, I mean, GST has been a remarkable success, as you can see.
And yet there is room to go further on that. So I think that in my view, we are on a path of great growth. We need to intensify. We need to carry on and have a combination of, I agree with CB, making states really realize that their future lies in being a part of this big story of the India destination, which is happening right now.
All right, Mr. N.K. Singh, I know you have to leave us, so thanks a lot for having joined us. Vinayak, something you wanted to add on the infrastructure story? We heard a lot what's happening. What else do you think India needs to do to make sure that our infrastructure is truly world-class?
Look, I've already made the point that hopefully when the final budget and the full budget is written, we will see the 11% growth of this year, which is purely a carry-on budget exercise because the construction materials have an inflation index of about 5 to 6%. So you're really talking about only a 4 to 5% real increase in the budget. So assuming that this is just for carry-on and that the next budget will have will go back to the momentum of 30 and 35%, which the economy requires, by the way. It's not a pipe dream. Remember that you got 7% GDP growth because infrastructure outlays increased by 30, 35%. And when you suddenly reduce that to 11%, then there is the lurking fear that your GDP may slow down, particularly when the finance ministry officials confidentially told us last year after the budget that they have a confidential research paper which says that every 1 rupee spent on public expenditure on infra results in 3 rupees of GDP, and 1 rupee given in FBT, direct benefit transfers, DBT, results in 90 paisa increase in GDP. So I am hoping and praying that when the full budget is released, we will go back to the momentum of 30, 35% increase in the infra budget, which will take it from 10 lakh crores currently to 13.5 lakh crores and not rest at 11.1, which has just been announced. Having made that point, the only other thing I wish to add is that there is very, very languid private sector investment in infrastructure. From as high as 38% around the end of the 12th plan, it has fallen to about 5 or 6%. So the government must address itself to all the stuff that was mentioned in the Kelkar committee report, that to revive PPP in infrastructure, that would be paramount for India going forward for the next 5-10 years. Is a massive effort for PPP revival. And purely in terms of example, the NHAI and MORTH are already engaged in significantly revamping the BOT model for roads, which means there's a clear recognition that existing PPP models did not work. That's a big item for the government to address itself. Let me stop here.
All right, Vinayak Chatterjee, thank you so much for joining us. Let's hope that a lot of that gets done. CB, if I can come back to you now. We are hearing Prime Minister's just said, what would be your manifesto for the next 5 years? I'm sure all political parties, we're going to move from the interim budget now to the election cycle pretty much. It's probably a good time for CII and other such bodies to come in and start getting their agenda into everyone's manifesto to say, here's what we really need to do to maintain the momentum, grow 7-8%, get to 7 trillion by 2030. Let's try and lock that in. Here's what you need to do. 1, 2, 3, 4. What would you be telling the political, not really, just the government, but political parties?
So really going beyond the budget and how one can take forward when we really look at the way we are looking at our GDP growth, so to say, and how do we make growth more qualitatively, beneficial to everyone. So I look at number one, how do we really move to areas like the social infrastructure side. So education, affordable education, higher education, which is affordable. So that's going to be critical because today India is in a spot for the demographic dividend for just some years, right? And it's in these years we'll have to get education right in terms of skilling, getting everyone educated and skilled in the manner in which we want them to. And how do you make it affordable? And it's really making people go to school and to college and to see how we are even able to see say for instance, we talk about India. I'm coming to the next point. India talks about a 48% of our women being STEM graduates. Now that's a great figure, but how do we see to it that they are able to be in jobs and quality jobs? And that's the quality of jobs, improving that, getting into it. That's going to be something which is going to be, one would like to see that in the manifestos. And we've seen a lot of that on women in the budget. But we need to see even private sector playing a role. Once upon a time, we were quite disappointed when we talked about 2% CSR, right? But then we have private sector following it actually, and in fact now appreciating that. Now, we need to have some nudge into seeing how private sector equal pay parity, so to say, how private sector really enable more women participation in the labor force. I would like to really see that. I'd like to see reforms being really committed on the next levels of reforms, and be it bureaucratic reforms, be it administrative reforms, be it judiciary, all of that, if we are able to see, which will make us and as this government we have been seeing, we've talked a lot about ease of living, which is beyond ease of doing business. So that's the third area that you talked about, and you say 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll say a 4. And the fourth is, we talked a little bit about that earlier. You know, at the ground level, when we really look at a district or in rural India, there is administration there too. So it's, and we often tend to blame, say for instance, we talked about, say, police. We often tend to blame that they have not been effective, they have not been right. I think the program to train them, to bring them into, to have a shared vision for the country, and reforms, train at the district level, at the rural level, making things easier in terms of administration, those are going to be very, very critical as we move along India.
But it's so interesting to hear what you're saying, and it's sort of partly an indication of how far we have come, that what we are now wanting are some very fundamental reforms about various things which affect people's day-to-day life. This is not about cut taxes and build roads and give us power and can we improve logistics, because fortunately that has been done. And because that has been done, we now have the ability to be a little bit more ambitious on what we can now do, so you can really start aspiring to being a developed country.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think we need to really move to a position where we are not just a developed country, but and not just our per capita income being higher, but really a country with so much of variety. If you see the entire of India, it's so different. From each place is different. Rural India in one place is different from rural India in other place. So when we really look at the quality of life, the quality of living, the quality of the growth, all of that is something that we would really look into as we go.
Okay, I know you have to leave us, but one last quick line, what could still go wrong? Sometimes, you know, everyone's saying India is in a sweet spot, things are really going well, and 7% growth. What could go wrong, if anything?
No, I think what we really need to do right, I would imagine, is really taking advantage of the demography in India and to see that we are really being able to include everyone in in what we are looking at for an India of tomorrow.
So train everybody so that the demographic dividend does not become a demographic disaster. I think that's one of the things to look at. CB, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure, and look forward to continuing to talk to you as we move forward to that. Dr. Singh, wanted a quick reaction to you to some of that agenda that Chandrajit Banerjee just put out. Would you agree with everything that he said?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the agenda that the new government must really be looking at is what do we need to do to ensure that the inequality goes down. There's a lot to be done on education and health. Close to about 8 lakh students go abroad to study, and that's a worrying figure, Vikram. The third thing that the government really needs to make sure is the GST tax. GST is rationalized because still there are about 4 or 5 slabs, so that needs to be worked upon. As I was mentioning, that we definitely need administrative and judicial reforms. Those are something that needs to be quickly done, and I hope that's there in the manifesto as well. I'm a little worried about that by 2047 we can be a developed economy, but we will not be a prosperous economy, and there's no point in becoming a developed country when 20% of its citizens still live below the poverty line. So these are some of the concerns that I have. My guess is that a lot needs to be done. One point, I normally don't disagree with what Vinayak says, but when he says that every rupee spent in DBT gives you only 90 paisa back, these are some of the things that that's not right, because that probably would have been the case about 20 years back when the delivery was very, very poor. But with technology and transparency, every rupee spent in the welfare schemes is a multiplier by about 3 to 4 times.
विकसित भारत के 4 स्तंभ युवा, गरीब, महिला और किसान सभी को एम्पावर करेगा। निर्मला जी का ये बजट देश के भविष्य के निर्माण का बजट है। इस बजट में 2047 के विकसित भारत की नींव को मजबूत करने की गारंटी है। मैं निर्मला जी और उनकी टीम को बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं। साथियों, इस बजट में युवा भारत की युवा आकांक्षाओं का, भारत की यंग एस्पिरेशंस का प्रतिबिंब है। बजट में 2 महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय लिए गए हैं। रिसर्च और इनोवेशन पर 1 लाख करोड़ रुपए का फंड बनाने की घोषणा की गई है। बजट में स्टार्टअप्स को मिलने वाली टैक्स छूट के विस्तार का भी ऐलान किया गया है। साथियों, इस बजट में फिस्कल डेफिसिट को नियंत्रण में रखते हुए कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर को 11,11,111 करोड़ रुपए की ऐतिहासिक ऊंचाई दी गई है। अर्थशास्त्रियों की भाषा में कहें तो एक प्रकार से स्वीट स्पॉट है। इससे भारत में 21वीं सदी के आधुनिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के निर्माण के साथ ही युवाओं के लिए अनगिनत रोजगार के नए अवसर तैयार होंगे। बजट में वंदे भारत स्टैंडर्ड की 40,000 आधुनिक बोगियां बनाकर उन्हें सामान्य यात्री ट्रेनों में लगाने का ऐलान किया गया है। इससे देश के अलग अलग रेल रूट पर करोड़ों यात्रियों में आरामदायक यात्रा का अनुभव बढ़ेगा। साथियों, हम एक बड़ा लक्ष्य तय करते हैं, उसे प्राप्त करते हैं और फिर उससे भी बड़ा लक्ष्य अपने लिए तय करते हैं। गरीबों के लिए हमने गांवों और शहरों में 4 करोड़ से अधिक घर बनाए। अब हमने 2 करोड़ और नए घर बनाने का लक्ष्य रखा है। हमने 2 करोड़ महिलाओं को लखपति दीदी बनाने का लक्ष्य रखा था। अब इस लक्ष्य को बढ़ाकर 3 करोड़ लखपति दीदी बनाने का कर दिया गया है। आयुष्मान भारत योजना ने गरीबों की बहुत मदद की है। अब आंगनवाड़ी और आशा वर्कर, उन सबको इस योजना का लाभ मिलेगा। साथियों, इस बजट में गरीब और मध्यम वर्ग को एम्पावर करने, उनके लिए आय के नए अवसर बनाने पर भी बहुत जोर दिया गया है। रूफटॉप सोलर अभियान में 1 करोड़ परिवारों को सोलर रूफटॉप के माध्यम से मुफ्त बिजली प्राप्त होगी। इतना ही नहीं, सरकार को अतिरिक्त बिजली बेचकर लोगों को 15 से 20 हजार प्रति वर्ष की आय भी होगी और ये हर परिवार को होगी। साथियों, आज जिस इनकम टैक्स रेमिशन स्कीम की घोषणा की गई है, उससे मध्यम वर्ग के करीब 1 करोड़ लोगों को बड़ी राहत मिलेगी। पिछली सरकारों ने सामान्य मानवी के सिर पर दशकों से ये बहुत बड़ी तलवार लटका कर रखी थी। आज इस बजट में किसानों के लिए भी बहुत महत्वपूर्ण और बड़े निर्णय लिए गए हैं। नैनो डीएपी का उपयोग हो, पशुओं के लिए नई योजना हो, पीएम मत्स्य संपदा योजना का विस्तार हो और आत्मनिर्भर ऑयल सीड अभियान हो। इससे किसानों की आय बढ़ेगी और खर्च कम होगा। मैं एक बार फिर सभी देशवासियों को इस ऐतिहासिक बजट के लिए शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
All right, that was Prime Minister Narendra Modi responding to the interim budget, referring to some of the highlights in the interim budget. And of course, we can expect a full budget in July. Well, we do have Dr. Naresh Trehan with us to help us shed some light on some of the things that have been happening there. Vinod Sharma with us as well. I'm going to talk to you about electronics in a second. But if you remember discussions we've often had, the focus on healthcare is always something that we used to hope would really come across in budgets and in government policies. Do you think that's now something which is a done deal when it comes to healthcare, the importance of healthcare and the importance of education?
So, as this budget is on account, even then some of the significant announcements were made in it. The fact that a lot of focus has gone on maternal health and child health, the inclusiveness of making more and more medical colleges, the fact that it also provides more employment has been addressed in this budget. So that's a good thing. And I think the best part of it is that inclusion of the Anganwadi workers, upgrading it, and then also giving them the facility of Ayushman. Because see, one of the things that is very important is that at the bottom to the last citizen standing in India, we need to take healthcare to a level where it is affordable for them. So I think that that is the huge impact of Ayushman that has happened, but extension of it to other workers, healthcare workers, is I think a very welcome move. Now as far as other parts of healthcare, the vaccination for cervical cancer, which has been, worldwide we know that it affects the young girls, women, and it carries a very high mortality. So if the vaccination is done as effectively as other vaccinations have been done, which I have no doubt about, then I think that it will be a big service to women and protecting them from cancer. So if you look at it, a lot of it has got to do with woman-centric, giving relief, which was lacking for them. So I think overall I must congratulate the fact that in a tight rope walk on a budget on account,
you still got some mention about healthcare in general. Yeah. But again, I spent the entire day today sort of doing report card of the last 10 years and looking ahead to the next 5 sort of a thing. So if you were to do that for healthcare, I don't think there's any doubt that when it comes to in cities like Delhi and, for better people who have access to top quality, hospitals, healthcare is as good as anywhere in the world, if not probably better. The challenge is always how do you take that to 1.4 billion people? How far do you think we've gotten that part of the exercise thanks to Ayushman Bharat, and what can be done to expedite it? How do we make sure that more people have access to world-class healthcare?
Basically, the implementation of the scheme which was announced a few years ago has been a little patchy because some of the states decided they're going to push their own schemes and not accept Ayushman. So that whole thing has put a little bit of twist on it. But I think that as more and more states join in, either matching Ayushman with their schemes, this will go down, filter down to the last person standing, as we talked about before. The fact is Anganwadis are in the villages. Yeah. The fact is that Anganwadi workers getting more power and Asha workers being recognized more is a very, very positive move.
All right. Let me turn to the electronics sector, because we were just talking a short while back about automotives being one of the areas where this entire concept of let's make India the center of global supply chains, let's replace China, that's playing out in a couple of areas. Auto was one, electronics is another. What did you hear today? What have you been experiencing? What needs to be done?
Okay. If it's okay with you, Vikram, I'll first like to answer what's happened in 10 years, what we expect in the next 5 in electronics, and then come botanic. So what we're doing is, and I describe that as a 4 into 400 meter relay. So first, a lot of people don't know that electronics is actually the largest manufacturing sector in the world. Yeah. Now we also see the horizontal, so we don't like to call it a vertical anymore, it is a horizontal, it's a meta resource that helps healthcare, agriculture, automotive, of course, and many other areas. Now including generation of electricity. So today when we talked about solar, for example, electronics plays a big role. So what we've done in the first leg, which has taken all of 10 years, is to become an assembly hub for the world. Mobile phones is a very good example. I hope the IT hardware, air conditioning, LEDs are now following soon. But that's only the first leg. The second leg that now sort of concerns us a lot, and we are in touch with the government, hopefully in July budget we will hear some good news, or before that, is the components, the deep-rooted, value-added manufacturing of electronics, which needs a completely different sort of policy prescription than assembly. Also, that brings a very different kind of jobs. So the assembly jobs are easy, are more casual in nature, if I may use that word. These are deep value, medium tech to high tech kind of jobs, skills that will last for 10 to 20 years. And the world needs those kind of people, so our demographic dividend comes into that.
And the world will need it more and more. The more you have geopolitical tension, the more you are wary about China, the more you start getting worried about Taiwan because of the possibility of war out there. The world needs a replacement.
That's right. And I think the government has put their money where their mouth is in terms of the semiconductor policy. We need to do the same for non-semiconductor components, and that's the discussion. And you're absolutely right. So the whole geopolitical thing, when we started discussing 5 years ago, was we needed a China plus one. Today, in fact, in the commercial circles, we talk of ABC, anywhere but China, because that's not a trusted supply chain source anymore. Having said that, the third leg is actually designing our own products. The healthcare that India needs is different from somewhere else. Can we have our own diagnostic tools? Can we have, and all the startup ecosystem that comes with it? And the fourth one is to have Indian brands. I don't think we will reach what we want to reach without having our own Sony, our own Samsung. So I do think that some of our Indian companies will stand up and become brands for the world. So that's where we need to go. The first leg has taken 10 years, and for the next 3 we have only 5 years. So obviously we need to hurry up. Given that today, the very short sort of space that the FM had to talk about this industry, I'm still happy that we talked about rooftop, we talked about electric vehicle charging. And I think the most, to me, the most impressive was that this 1 lakh crore fund that they're talking about for for entrepreneurs.
A lot of people have got attention to that, because that could potentially really kickstart a lot of R&D, a lot of development, easy course source of funding. But of course, the modalities of how that is actually
we don't know yet.
Passed on. It has to be a simple, easy access. Some kid in a dorm somewhere should have the ability to say, I've got a great idea, will somebody come
and can I take it to market?
Can I take it to market?
So I like that Jai Anusandhan. I think it's a great word. I think innovation is in our bloodstream in India. Unfortunately, when we don't get it right, we do this whole jugaad shortcut. That's not what we need. So I think, I was listening to what CB was saying. One of the things that we still don't get right is quality. So I always say, today, if you look at, if you were to rate Japan, China, and Korea, anybody on the street knows what the rating is in quality. Where are we as India? If we don't do things right, will we be number 1, 2, 3, 4? What is our aspiration? And I think those are questions we still need to answer.
I think that's really well put. Thanks a lot, Vinod, for having been with us. Let me get a quick final take from you on the budget.
So, as Vinod was mentioning, that one of the things that is really pulling us down as far as healthcare delivery system is concerned is the high cost of equipment. And the more we develop our industry, electronic and medical industry and AI incorporated into AI, I think the better off we will be. And I think the future looks good, and all the things that we were talking about, innovation and all that, is only going to create that segment for the medical sector. And also, don't forget, what we do for India applies to 4 billion people around the world. So we have a great potential there.
All right, let me just rope in Lekha Chakrabarti now joining us, professor at the NIPFP, board member of the International Institute of Public Finance. How do you've had a little bit of a time to look at the budget. We've also been trying to figure out interim budget, of course, but the fact that there is a certain amount of fiscal discipline that she's talking to, 5.1, despite all the spending that is happening. Your reaction to some of what you heard in the interim budget?
Thank you. The fiscal arithmetic, that's very promising. She has not deviated from the fiscal consolidation part. And, any pre-election budget, budget credibility is very important than engaging in announcing the freebies. So that's welcome. But when we look into the revenue deficit, that's slightly high because she can't do anything about phasing out of revenue deficit at this point because it affects all the social infrastructure announcements she has made in the budget and the employment generation programs and even the income support to the farmers. So social infrastructure, that needs to be, given importance, and that's why her revenue deficit is still very high, and that's equally welcome. But, fiscal risk is now coming up. In the post-pandemic period over the last 5 years, we kept our deficit and debt very high, linking it to the capex formation. And it's giving results, like with the, not instantaneously, but with the lagged effect, it's giving fruits that our growth is getting all right, because that didn't happen when we engaged in the recapitalization programs or when we engaged in the bankruptcy code and all. It didn't work. Some missing piece of the strategy was there, and that's exactly the capex investment, and it is giving us returns. But at the same time, if the revenue deficit, if it is curtail further, that's going to impact the social infrastructure. So this is quite welcome that investment-oriented budget, the growth-oriented budget with leave nobody behind narrative by focusing on physical infrastructure, digital and social infrastructure. And for women, that gender budgeting emphasis of access of women to credit, that's welcome, because on one side, the central bank policies with the interest rate management, that's mounting. The cost of credit is mounting. So
All
here,
right.
the access of women to the credit is welcome. Thank you.
All right. All right, Lekha, thank you so much for joining us with that very interesting perspective. Thanks a lot for being with us. Let me welcome two very special guests now. Mukesh Bhutani is back, of course, in a budget which he says no tax changes. I'm not sure how much tax-related stuff we have to talk about, but some of the other directional questions. So it's great to have you back with us. And, of course, Sunil Vachani, founder and chairman of Dixon Technologies. We were just talking about electronics, the largest, manufacturing area anyway. And as India tries to become the alternative to China and who knows, Taiwan perhaps as well, who better than you to tell us how that story is going? What did you hear in the budget? What needs to be done to enable us to achieve that dream?
Thank you, Vikram. I think, there is no doubt that we in India and the industry are sitting on a very, very large opportunity. And this opportunity of making India the next hub for electronic manufacturing. And I think if you see it in terms of numbers, right, if you see the global market, it's almost $900 billion in terms of the outsourced electronic manufacturing. And India is just 2% of it. Even a country like Vietnam exports almost $130 billion worth of electronics, from the country. And right now what we are doing is hardly about $20 billion. So I think there is a long, long way to go.
But 2%, what percent would China be? What percent would...
I think China is the dominant player as far as electronic manufacturing is concerned, right? And I think if you look at the market size of some of the products that we talk about, so if you look at air conditioners, a product like washing machines or televisions, I think China does almost 10x of us. But coming back to the budget, I think, yesterday there were some significant announcements which were made. And these came in terms of the duty reductions. And I think I'll tell you why they're significant is one, because they help improve the Indian industry's competitiveness as far as the domestic market is concerned. Two, I think it will give a huge fillip to the domestic market for mobile phones also, because eventually these duty cuts will be passed on. But
I think what is interesting that those duty cuts were announced one day before the budget. You would have expected to see them
that's right. Yeah, that was surprising, but I think definitely welcome, no doubt. But I think what is most significant is that when we're looking at exports, global competitiveness, higher duties tend to get passed on, when we're looking at exports, even though our intention is that we don't export our taxes and duties. But let's appreciate that the tier 2 and the tier 3 suppliers eventually do not get refunds of these duties, so they get passed on. So I think what we need in the industry is not high duties, we need a correct duty structure. And I think that's why this step taken yesterday was very significant.
All right, Sunil, thanks for joining us. Before I come to you, very special guest joining us, Amita K, the Indian Sherpa to G20, is with us right now. Mr. Khan, thank you so much for being with us. Just wanted to get your first reaction to this interim budget that we've just heard.
So Vikram, first of all, I think it's the budget by a very confident government, which is very clear that it should not undertake populism in an election year. It will come back and take far-reaching measures. Secondly, it's budget by a government which is taking a long-term approach and saying that the real golden period of India will be the run-up to 2047. And therefore, you have to keep your macroeconomic fundamentals very strong. And that is demonstrated by the fact that the finance minister has brought down the fiscal deficit to 5.1% and says that it will come down to 4.5% in the subsequent year. So a clear roadmap. And that really means that the government will borrow less from the market. And when the government borrows less from the market means that interest rates will come down. And when interest rates come down means that the private sector will be able to borrow at a much lower rate of interest. And that in the long run is critical. To my mind, that's the major signal which has been given by this budget. Because the government had taken its capex spend very substantially. It's from 2013-14, it was just 1%. It took it up to 3.3% last year. It's taken it again to 3.4%. But to my mind, what it is aiming for is of crowding in private sector along with government capex spend and really pushing for private sector to go in and drive India's growth in the coming years. And that, to my mind, is really the key factor. Secondly, I think it's some of its assumptions, particularly its assumptions on nominal growth, is on a moderate side, and I think you'll have in the end you will probably end up with better growth. Thirdly, the focus on some key areas like putting in about 1 lakh of crores for R&D spend is huge, because the private sector will then be able to push for deep tech. That is what India needs. India needs to grow in sunrise areas of growth. India needs to really drive its economy in a range of new areas, and deep tech is necessary. So if you are able to push for R&D with that 1 lakh crore, it will be a major driver. The
Mr. Kant, in fact, I just wanted to ask you. Yeah.
So
right.
That 1 lakh.
Mr. Kant, I just wanted to ask you actually. Mr. Kant, I actually wanted to just ask you in a little bit more detail about that 1 lakh crore rupees, because it's got a lot of people's attention. Now, you, of course, have earlier, Niti, and then even now you work very closely with a number of very bright young people doing startups, coming up with great ideas. Indians are innovative. Indians have set up some of the finest tech companies anywhere on the planet. What is your own sense of how this 1 lakh crores can best be channelized so it does get to people? Some young kid who's coming up with some new technology in a hostel room somewhere gets access to capital to be able to develop that and build that up and take that idea up at scale. How can this be done in the most efficient manner, according to you?
So, Vikram, this 1 lakh crore is really amount for R&D. This is not for deep tech. This is for R&D, where private sector can utilize it over 50 years at very low rates of interest. But what you are talking about is the need for driving deep tech through young startups. And that is critical. And to my mind, what the government has envisaged, of course, is they've talked about deep tech for defense. And defense really cuts across many of these areas of growth. Many innovations, when they happen in the defense area, they spill over to information technology, they spill out to energy and many other areas. And once you have a fund of funds, the basic due diligence will then be done by the venture fund, who will then be able to take the risks is taken by the venture fund, but then he utilizes fund from the fund of funds. Much of the success of the Startup India movement is because of the fund of funds which was created in the SIDBI. And I think that needs to be given a huge fillip for the deep tech sector. That's critical. And the third, I think the key area which the government has talked about is the 75,000 crores for states which are reforming themselves. And for them to use the 75,000 crores for infrastructure. And it's all milestone based. So the private sector, what will happen as a consequence of this is that you are really incentivizing the states to go in for reforms. You are incentivizing the states to push for infrastructure creation. And there again, the private sector will come in a big way. So the ultimate beneficiary of this also will be the private sector. And lastly, my view is that the focus on solar energy, electric vehicles, because if you are going to give 300 units free to those who install solar rooftop, means you are giving a benefit of close to about 15,000 rupees of electricity to the household. So that's a big incentive for people to put up solar rooftop. So that plus charging stations, electric vehicles, plus pushing for connectivity, railway connectivity to cement, minerals, ports, all this will be a big driver of infrastructure growth in the coming years. And that, to my mind, will reduce the cost of logistics in India in a very, very substantial way.
So if you were to look at the last 4 or 5 years and look at the roadmap that's being done out here, do you think that massive public spending on infrastructure that we've seen, railways, airports, ports, the road building program which is happening, is that something which you think is one of the most critical aspects in unlocking what was potentially one of the biggest bottlenecks to the rise of India and the growth of India? You couldn't become the third largest economy in the world if you had third world, infrastructure. Is that the reason why, and you think the government is going to go on spending this money on infrastructure just to make sure that you have to reach the highest quality of infrastructure all across the country?
So Vikram, if you look at it from a 2013 perspective in percentage terms, till the last year, you had a 592% increase in capex allocation. It's gone up from 1% to 3.3% of your GDP. So that's huge. And that's why you've ended up creating some great roads, some expressways. You've been able to build houses. You've been able to, improve your railway, all that. And that was necessary during that period when private sector had taken a retreat. What the government is now trying to do is, by making only a marginal increase in your capex from 3.3 to 3.4%, the government is saying that we will now crowd in private sector into many areas of growth. And therefore, it has kept the fiscal deficit at 5.1%. Now, if you were to increase your capex expenditure, many people are saying that capex expenditure there was potential for greater capex, but the more capex you do, then you increase your fiscal deficit, and therefore your lowering of interest rates will not take place because the government borrowing will take place. And therefore, it was very important that the government keeps it at 3.4%. Government focuses on bringing down bank rates, the interest rates down, and government focuses on bringing in private sector into infrastructure on a long-term basis, because efficiency, productive efficiency, better quality infrastructure, as you've seen in airports, all happens when private sector does the design, it does operation, it does maintenance on a long-term basis, it does toll collection. You'll have better quality private sector investment.
All right, Amitabh Kant, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. It's always great listening to you and getting a sense of what the government has in mind. Before you leave us, maybe if you could, one or two quick points of the unfinished agenda which you think the government's going to push for now in the next 2 or 3 years ahead. What's the unfinished agenda?
Well, I think this budget is reflective of the strong macroeconomic fundamentals, and it's focused on inclusive growth. It's very clear that it's very confident that it's going to come back and then look at a long-term perspective of 2047. It's not a populist budget. It's not taken any populist measures. I think the unfinished agenda now really relates to the states. The states have to become the agents of change. They have to learn from what the central government has done, and they need to be the drivers of growth, and that will be critical in the years to come.
All right, Amitabh Kant, thank you so much for being with us with that perspective. Thank you so much. Amitabh Kant, India Sherpa to G20, talking about that. Mukesh Bhutani is with us, Vipin Sodhi with us also. And Amrish Baliga. Let me just quickly touch in first with you, Amrish. From a stock market point of view, what were you perhaps looking for? What were you expecting? I mean, it's the interim budget, so I'm sure the markets didn't have very high expectations of it one way or the other. But what do you make of it?
See, first, I think we were looking at the fiscal prudence, the fiscal deficit, which the markets were expecting to be between 5.3 to 5.5. I think there's a huge beat. She's announced 5.1, which is great. But I think there's still a risk of missing out on this, over the next 1 year, because it's much lower than what the market was expecting. So I think that risk is there. But then if you look at the capex spend, I think that is more or less in line with what the market was expecting, because we have seen huge increase in the last couple of years. That was because of COVID. We have seen a 32% CAGR. But this time it was expected to be about 12 to 13%. She's announced 11%, which is perfectly fine, because we are looking at the private sector spend, which has already started increasing. I think that should increase more. And clearly, I mean, the focus was expected to be on empowering the poor, youth, women and farmers. I mean, that's exactly what has happened. And you've had a number of sectors which has, in fact, been benefited because of the budget. I mean, you clearly have the farm sector benefited, rooftop solar, I think that's a clear focus area, tourism, railways, housing, as well as R&D. R&D, again, would be more on the defense side of it, which is good for that sector. So overall, from a market perspective, I think it's a very decent interim budget. But then we should remember that the market had already run up decently well. So because of which we are not seeing a further move post the announcement.
Right, so Amrish, from a point of view, somebody watching this, looking at the market, saying, okay, markets, as you said, have run up a little bit. What would you be doing right now? Buying, holding on, booking profits, selling and running for the hills? What would you be doing?
I think possibly the last option, because we have seen a stupendous rise in the market in the last close to 12 months. I mean, if you look at Y on Y, we are 24% up. If you look at the number of stocks which have become multi-baggers, I mean, 600 stocks have become multi-baggers. I mean, you have about 2,500 stocks being quoted on a regular basis. I'm not talking of penny stocks. 600 decent stocks have become multi-baggers. So when that happens, normally it happens.
All right, Amrish, I think we just lost your signal. Thanks a lot, however. I think we got the sense of what you wanted to say. Mukesh, sorry, you've been waiting patiently while we were talking to Amitabh Kant. Your sense of the budget, what you heard, and directionally going forward. You did hear some remarks about how they would like to have this low burden, low, ease of compliance, ease of paying taxes. That's the direction that we will see a lot of returns from. And that's what the numbers, quite frankly, are bearing out. Yeah.
For me, there were two key takeaways. One was fiscal prudence. And it's not just about figures, 5.8 going to 5.1 and 4.5. It's just the manner in which she's been able to achieve it, largely thanks to revenue mobilization and tax buoyancy. But I think that this period will stand out as a golden period in fiscal consolidation. Historically, fiscal consolidation was driven by curtailing revenue expenditure, curtailing expenditure, and at the cost of curtailing capital expenditure. So it's not just the percentage of capital expenditure in the overall expenditure basket of the government that has gone well, that Mr. Kant spoke about in terms of figures, but also there is reduction in pensions and interest payouts for borrowings from the market, coupled with revenue mobilization. I think that, 5 out of 6 budgets, she's kind of under-promised and over-delivered on tax collection. I think she's gained a lot of confidence in terms of what she has set out as a target that also gives more confidence to the government from capex allocation standpoint. So I think this period will stand out, barring any black swan kind of external events. I think, her statement that India is going to experience a sustainable growth in the next 5 years, though political in some way, assumes significance. So this is one message. The second message is the new definition of FDI, first developed in India. I think this again goes back to lend thrust to Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat program, which hopefully combined with the global value chain that Vipin was speaking about in the morning, is leading us to a direction of what we will see in the Finance Bill 2 of July 2024.
Right, but the first part of what you said is actually very striking, because as you are saying, a lot of good things have happened. You're spending on capital, you're building infrastructure, you're therefore building assets for the country, and despite that you are being able to bring your fiscal deficit down a certain amount. It also means that whatever you've done with tax buoyancy is good. So the numbers are moving in the right direction. It's not that you're cutting off capital spending. Correct. To be able to achieve
so if you look at the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2004, just before the financial crisis, we were best insofar as the actual figure of fiscal deficit and revenue deficit was. But the quality of spending was not as good. So I think the golden period that I'm talking about is her quality of spending that has assumed momentum. You see, you cannot curtail capex now anymore. Somebody was talking about it in the other panel. Don't you think 10% is less? Well, I think 10% is very good if you look at the base and the impact that is likely to create. But then we still need to see that in Finance Bill 2, whether she actually takes up the capital base.
You're also assuming, as she did, that she's going to be back delivering the budget in July. So we'll have to see how it all pans out. But I think, yes, credit for, for some of the ways in which she's actually managed the numbers. Your sense, now that we've heard the interim budget, really short speech, 1 hour, much smaller than everyone was expecting. What was your sense of it?
I think it's a very confident government. I mean, confident government in delivering and taking on some hard numbers. So I'll just pick up one on what Amita K said, that the action is in the states and states have to reform. And I mentioned before, states need to have their visions also set for a Viksit Bharat. Incentivizing state through linking financial deliveries with states will enhance their own reform program. Also want to take on from what Mukesh said, actually very confident of the revenue boosts that she is planning to be able to say, I'll increase capital capex by 11% but also deliver 5.1%. Now, nobody really, I think, was talking of 5.1%. It was 5.3, 5.4, 50 basis points adequate. It's more than 50 basis points.
Yeah, I would love to see how those numbers actually pan out. So we'll have to see. Rajan Navani now joining us. Just wanted to get your sense, Mr. Navani, of the interim budget. Final thoughts from everybody on what we make of it and till we wait for the full budget in July.
No, I think my thoughts are very similar to what has been discussed so far. I think, the good part about this budget is built upon the foundations of previous budgets, still demonstrating great fiscal prudence, as most people have said, and focusing on, increasing capital expenditure and also the areas that are of immediate need for a country like India. But one thing, Vikram, that stands out for me particularly is that, 1 lakh crore corpus, which is going to go towards, long-term at zero cost or very low interest for the building the research ecosystem, technology, innovation ecosystem for India. Because I think the good part about the way this is panning out is that, the government itself is a great customer of innovation. Looking at the investment that's happening in digital public infrastructure, today India has honestly been able to demonstrate to the world, the low cost at which it could build UPI transactions, etc. 45% of the world transactions happen here. And as this digital public infrastructure goes into agriculture, goes into healthcare and many other areas, I think the opportunity for Indian entrepreneurs and businesses to create, product-led innovation ecosystems around the world will become much larger, as these systems will get deployed largely in Global South, where price performance will always be a very big driver. So to me, the excitement is, India started its journey as Startup India, moved to Scale Up India, and now to a Research First India. I think that could be a great way for multiple stakeholders to come together to make investing in research as cool as investing in startups, because that's the layer that needs to get strengthened for India to position itself, on a global stage as it comes over the next 25 years in the Amrit Kaal. So to me, I think directionally, the budget focus on technology, focus on key issues, whether it's women and children together, the youth, along with investments in the right level of infrastructure, is a big plus for this budget.
All right, Rajan Navani, Vipin, Mr. Bhutani, thank you all so much for joining us. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it there for the moment. Thank you all for watching this special coverage of the interim budget, but break follows, and on the other side of that, all the rest of our regular programming. Thanks a lot for watching.
The Indian economy has witnessed profound positive transformation in the last 10 years. The people of India are looking ahead to the future with hope and optimism. With the blessings of the people, when our government, under the visionary and dynamic leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, assumed office in 2014, the country was facing enormous challenges. With Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas as its mantra, the government overcame those challenges in right earnest. Structural reforms were undertaken. Pro-people programs were formulated and implemented promptly. Conditions were created for more opportunities for employment and entrepreneurship. The economy got a new vigor. The fruits of development started reaching the people at scale. The country got a new sense of purpose and hope. Naturally, the people blessed the government with a bigger mandate. In the second term, our government, under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister, doubled down on its responsibilities to build a prosperous country with comprehensive development of all people and all regions. Our government strengthened its mantra to Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas. Our development philosophy covered all elements of inclusivity, namely social inclusivity through coverage of all strata of the society, and geographical inclusivity through development of all regions of the country. With the whole of nation approach of Sabka Prayas, the country overcame the challenges of once-in-a-century pandemic, took long strides towards Atmanirbhar Bharat, committed to Panch Pran, and laid solid foundations for the Amrit Kaal. As a result, our young country has high aspirations, pride in its present, and hope and confidence for a bright future. We expect that our government, based on its stupendous work, will be blessed again by the people with a resounding mandate. Inclusive development and growth. Our humane and inclusive approach to development is a marked and deliberate departure from the earlier approach of provisioning up to village level. Development programs were thus provisioned. In the last 10 years, however, have targeted each and every household and individual through housing for all, Har Ghar Jal, electricity for all, cooking gas for all, bank accounts and financial services for all in record time. The worries about food have been eliminated through free ration for 80 crore people. Minimum support prices for the produce of Annadata are periodically increased appropriately. These and the provision of basic necessities have enhanced real income in the rural areas. Their economic needs could be addressed, thus spurring growth and generating jobs. Social justice. Our government is working with an approach to development that is all-round, all-pervasive, and all-inclusive. Sarvangin, Sarvasparshi, or Sarvasamaveshi. It covers all castes and people at all levels. We are working to make India a Vikasit Bharat by 2047. For achieving that goal, we need to improve people's capability and empower them. Previously, social justice was mostly a political slogan. For our government, social justice is an effective and necessary governance model. The saturation approach of covering all eligible people is the true and comprehensive achievement of social justice. This is secularism in action, reduces corruption, and prevents nepotism, prevents Bhai Bhatijawad. There is transparency and assurance that benefits are delivered to all eligible people. The resources are distributed fairly. All, regardless of their social standing, get access to opportunities. We are addressing systemic inequalities that had plagued our society. We focus on outcomes and not on outlays so that the social economic transformation is achieved. As our Prime Minister firmly believes, we need to focus on 4 major castes. They are Garib, Mahilayein, Yuva, and Annadata. Their needs, their aspirations, and their welfare are our highest priority. The country progresses when they progress. All 4 require and receive government support in their quest to better their lives. Their empowerment and well-being will drive the country forward. Garib Kalyan, Desh Ka Kalyan. We believe in empowering the poor. The earlier approach of tackling poverty through entitlements had resulted in very modest outcomes. When the poor became empowered partners in the development process, government's power to assist them also increases manifold. With the pursuit of Sabka Saath, in these 10 years, the government has assisted 25 crore people to get freedom from multi-dimensional poverty. Our government's efforts are now getting synergized with energy and passion of such empowered people. This is truly elevating them from poverty. Direct benefit transfer of 34 lakh crore rupees from the government using PM Jan-Dhan accounts has led to savings of 2.7 lakh crores of rupees for the government. This savings has been realized through avoidance of leakages prevalent earlier. The savings have helped in providing more funds for Garib Kalyan. PM Swanidhi has provided credit assistance to 78 lakh street vendors. From that total of 78 lakh street vendors, 2.3 lakh have received credit for the third time. PM Janman Yojana reaches out to the particularly vulnerable tribal groups who have remained outside the realm of development so far. PM Vishwakarma Yojana provides end-to-end support to artisans and craftspeople engaged in 18 trades. The schemes for empowerment of Divyangs and transgender persons reflect firm resolve of our government to leave no one behind. Welfare of Annadata. Farmers are our Annadata. Every year under PM Kisan Samman Yojana, direct financial assistance is provided to 11.8 crore farmers, including marginal and small farmers. Crop insurance is given to 4 crore farmers under PM Fasal Bima Yojana. These, besides several other programs, are assisting Annadata in producing food for the country and for the world. Electronic National Agricultural Market has integrated 1,361 mandis and is providing services to 1.8 crore farmers with trading volume of 3 lakh crores of rupees. The sector is poised for inclusive, balanced, higher growth and productivity. These are facilitated from farmer-centric policies, income support, coverage of risks through price and insurance support, promotion of technologies and innovations through startups. Empowering the Amrit PD, the Yuva. Our prosperity depends on adequately equipping and empowering the youth. The National Education Policy 2020 is ushering the transformational reforms. PM Schools for Rising India, PM Shri, are delivering quality teaching and nurturing holistic and well-rounded individuals. The Skill India mission has trained 1.4 crore youth, upskilled and reskilled 54 lakh youth, and established 3,000 new ITIs. A large number of institutions of higher learning, namely 7 IITs, 16 triple ITs, 7 IIMs, 15 AIMS, and 390 universities have been set up. PM Mudra Yojana has sanctioned 43 crore loans aggregating to 22.5 lakh crores of rupees for entrepreneurial aspirations of our youth. Besides that, Fund of Funds, Startup India, and Startup Credit Guarantee schemes are assisting our youth. They are also becoming Rozgar Data. The country is proud of our youth scaling new heights in sports. The highest ever medal tally in Asian Games and Asian Para Games in 2023 reflects a high confidence level. Chess prodigy and our #1 ranked player Pragnananda put up a stiff fight against the reigning world champion Magnus Carlsen in 2023. Today, India has over 80 chess grandmasters compared to little over 20 in 2010. Momentum for Nari Shakti, the empowerment of women through entrepreneurship, ease of living, and dignity for them has gained momentum in these 10 years. 30 crore Mudra Yojana loans have been given to women entrepreneurs. Female enrollment in higher education has gone up by 28% in 10 years. In STEM courses, girls and women constitute 43% of enrollment, one of the highest in the world. All these measures are and giving over 70% houses under PM Awas Yojana in rural areas to women, and giving over 70% houses under PM Awas Yojana in rural areas to women as sole or joint owners have enhanced their dignity. Exemplary track record of governance, development, and performance. Besides delivering on high growth in terms of gross domestic product, the government is equally focused on a more comprehensive GDP, that is, governance, development, and performance. Our government.
Okay, rolling? Yeah. Well, this was, of course, just an interim budget, full budget coming in July, but it really does set the stage for analyzing what's happened in the last 10 years and perhaps looking ahead at some of the unfinished agenda. And joining us to talk a lot more about that, Pawan Goenka of InSpace, fresh from revamping virtually the entire auto sector in India. So great to have you with us. And Vachani Sinha, thank you so much for being with us as well. The work which you're doing in solar is, I think, also being referred to as one of the major thrust areas for India. That you must grow, but you must grow in an environmental manner. What is your sense of the budget, of the interim budget? What does it tell you of the path ahead?
Well, as you said that even though it was interim budget, but it sets the stage for the full budget. And what the Honorable Finance Minister has done is given us glimpses of what's coming. And to me, what's coming is continuity. That's clear, that you're not going to see lots of things dropped and new things coming up, which is good. That means what we had done in the past or that they had done in the past is working. What you also see is confidence in the economy, confidence in the government's ability to deliver on the promise. What you also see is a longer term outlook of Viksit Bharat 2047. I think these are 3 or 4 words that should get engraved in all of us, that what we are working for, no matter what field you are in, whether in business or any other sector, 2047 developed India is what we are working towards. So I think these are things coming out clearly from the budget speech. Very short speech, but very impactful that way. And everybody who's around here feels very encouraged.
So confidence in both in the Indian economy and also in the fact that they're coming back in July.
That of course is clear from anything and everything that is being said by the Honorable Prime Minister or by the Finance Minister or any other person.
Right. Vachani, one of the problems with having goals that are like Viksit India 247, it's great because it helps you understand what you're trying to get to in the path there. But with that, as with the environment, the issue is you should also give yourself short-term targets, because otherwise you say there's no accountability for the next 1 year or 2 years. You say, okay, I'm worrying about 2040 or 2047. So there are these short-term targets also that we should keep our eye on.
No, absolutely, Vikram. I totally agree with what you're saying, and I also feel that the government has been very mindful of that as well. Yeah. And so if I look at the decade-long journey as far as our sector is concerned, we have seen a very deliberate effort to build the sector. and it has been developed by delivering on policy, and which has made it possible for entrepreneurs like us to deliver on the ground. So I think that connect which this government, through policy announcements and engaging the sort of entire ecosystem to do better and to implement and to move ahead, has been quite good, and we've seen that in our sector. And so there is a year-on-year focus. When we look at the goals for our sector, I mean, you have a 2070 goal, which is the net zero goal for the country. But year on year, the move from 15 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts is a very deliberate here and now goal. And how do we get there? By incentivizing sectors, whether it is green hydrogen on one hand or whether it's offshore wind on one hand. And at the other hand, at the base of the pyramid, providing muft bijli to people on the ground, the poorest of the poor, I think kind of joins the dot in a nice way, which is here and now.
So you're saying that there is that overall framework on how that transformation has to happen, and therefore entrepreneurs know where to plug in, and that you have a sense of the framework. It's not that you're going to go out and make a lot of investments and suddenly there'll be some flip-flop and you're saying, oh my God, I've got to go back to the drawing board from scratch.
That is there, but more importantly, I think what we've observed is that this government has got ears for the private sector and for this sector. And so over the last decade, if you see, whether it's the parliament or whether there have been no real issues associated with our sector, there's a huge amount of commitment and there's a vision of what we want to do. How can we juice it not only for the sector, but for the people, for the youth, for the farmers, for women, and for, I guess, eliminating poverty at a certain level as well.
So, that's now playing itself out in a couple of very important areas, and you've got expertise in both of them, so I'm going to ask you both of them. One is shifting manufacturing to India, and obviously electronics and auto would be two of the key leading areas where manufacturing can move to. Then how does India have leadership in new sunrise areas and space? Space has been around for a while, but potentially is a sunrise area. So what is the sort of a blueprint that exists in these areas, and how far are we, how is the progress towards those blueprints?
So I think these are two areas that I can talk on forever, but let me try and do it in a few minutes. See, first of all, I think that for Viksit Bharat in 2047, manufacturing has to play a much bigger role than what it's playing today. Government has done quite a bit in terms of PLI scheme and many other ease of doing business and logistics and so on, but still the needle hasn't moved in the sense that we are still at 15-16% of economy coming from manufacturing. I think that we need to aim for 25% coming from manufacturing by 2047 and an interim goal of say about 20% by 2030. Okay? Now for that to happen, PLI is one thing, working well, more may come, may not come, doesn't matter. But there are many other things that we need to put in place for us to become really globally competitive in manufacturing. And all of it is not what government needs to do. In fact, a lot of it is what industry needs to do. So together working with the government, and given what's said that government is listening, that's very important. That was not always the case. And with that, if we can get a true partnership between the government and private sector, which is happening, then we can perhaps achieve that goal. And there are a lot of things that need to be done. PLI is just sort of one part of it. When it comes to sunrise sector, again, it really, when I was asked to come into the space sector by the government, I really didn't know what I was getting into. And once I get in the sector, I see the seriousness with which even the Prime Minister personally is taking the space sector, and how he sees the opportunities that it can create, not just in terms of technology and science and what looks good and what gives headlines. That's we are doing very good in already. But in terms of what it can do for economic contribution to the country and what it can do to the social advantage, making life of our citizens better, is something that's very much in the focus of the government. So there are many such things like space sector that the government is focusing on, which may be nothing today, but will become very prominent in multiple areas, not just economic growth. So I think both of these are very important examples of where India needs to do little more than what we are doing if we really want to get to the 2047 goal of Viksit Bharat, and where we are looking at many small things.
So, I mean, we could go on, as you said, talking about this forever, and we probably will, but I'm just going to refer to one thing that was announced in the budget that I think has got a lot of people's attention, could potentially be a game changer in certain areas. We need to build tech in-house. We need to have innovation here, build tech here, do research here, all of that things. Two things are required. You need to get high-quality universities to come in here, which is part one, which I think the government is working on. Part two, the money which has just been announced, 1 lakh crore rupees, 50 years interest-free, is pretty much means you're just giving them the money towards R&D. Could this be a game changer?
I think that's a very big thing. Frankly, one of the problems that we have today is that industry is not spending enough in R&D. India as a GDP percentage has one of the lowest R&D spend at about 1.4% or so. But out of that, bulk of it comes from the government, and little comes from the private sector. Now here the government is saying, I am giving you money to invest in R&D. And if with that industry doesn't spend in R&D, then I think we are in trouble.
It's a game changer?
I mean, total game changer. If I could say, not at this scale, but in a small way, Renew has always been very committed to R&D because of the need of the sector. People didn't know much about this sector, so we've just learned as we went along. So we've partnered with global universities to do what we need to do, to figure out how to recycle long term, how to do green hydrogen better, and so on and so forth. We have a center of excellence at IIT Delhi. We have other partnerships around the world, very valuable, super critical. I think there are many companies who are very committed to it. It's music to our ears, I think, for those who want to invest in R&D. I think I also see that as a woman. Let me make one point which goes along. I think R&D is an area which also attracts many women. So hoping to see many more women get engaged at the urban level, at tier 2, tier 3, and also at the rural level across different sectors. Super powerful for an inclusive growth in the coming years.
If I could just make one more point on R&D. See, a lot of people in India itself underestimate the ability of Indian technologists to do R&D. I have been associated with some of the IITs for some time now, and I see absolutely fabulous work being done, but does not see its way to a product or service. And if R&D doesn't see its way to a product or service, it really ends up in a paper. Yeah. And that's what I hope that this 1 lakh crore will do, create that bridge between the IITs and IISCs and so on, and the industry. And we can really grow. And we need maybe 1/3, 1/4 of expenditure for a given R&D than what might be spent in Europe or USA.
All right, I'm going to leave it there for the moment, but one line perhaps each on items of the unfinished agenda that you would like to see a lot more on in the next 1 year, 2 years. You want to go first?
Ladies first. On green finance, I think I've seen a lot happening on finance globally. I think there's need for us to get more capital, more innovation, and real sustainable capital. For green bonds, my request would be for us to eliminate the withholding tax, which is there for global bonds. That'll go a long way in giving us the push we need.
All right.
Well, putting on my old hat of automotive industry, I would say that one unfinished business yet is the electric vehicle penetration in passenger cars, passenger vehicles. I'm now not going to say government has not done enough, but enough has not happened. And somehow we need to find what is missing in that puzzle and why we are not going much faster than what we are in passenger vehicles.
All right, Pavan Goenka, Chandrajit Banerjee, thank you both so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you, sir.